7 high-rise apartments up in flames, which took firefighters some 43 hours to put out. I'm talking about the tragedy of Wang Fuk Court, Tai Po district in Hong Kong last year. This wasn't just a fire, it was a cascade of failures, from fire alarms that did not go off, storage water tanks that were empty, to construction workers seen smoking near flammable construction materials. 168 people dead and thousands homeless. As the independent inquiry continues months on, the questions are only getting more uncomfortable. What were the warning signs that were missed? And beyond the devastation, what are the hardest truths this tragedy is forcing the city to confront? I'm Genevieve Woo, and I'm joined by our correspondent Deborah Wong, who's been on the ground from the very start, speaking to survivors and following the investigation closely. Deborah, take us back to the first day when you arrived at Wang Fuk Court. What did you notice that made you realize that this wasn't, a typical fire? It was spiraling to something far bigger.
I think for me it was the utter stillness of the entire scene, of the entire situation. Back then, all roads leading to the estate were completely blocked, so I had to take the train in, and I got a call at about 7 p.m. I had just wrapped a live report in our Shenzhen office, so getting to Tai Po was fairly quick for me because it was just across the border. And the only way to get there was, of course, by the MTR. And I remember drawing up Google Maps for navigation. The minute I alighted, I could see the burning buildings in the distance. I didn't even need the map anymore. I was just following the crowd, and everyone was so silent. People were either walking, their eyes looking on the ground, or they just stood rooted to the spot, staring at the buildings. And I remember by the time I arrived, it was past 8 p.m. It was already dark, but the fire was raging so brightly in the night sky. So I literally just walked in a trance towards that complex. And when I got closer, I could see fire engines, police vans. They were lined up all along the road from the MTR station all the way to the estate. It's a good 10-15 minutes walk. And so you can just imagine the number, the scale of emergency response. It was truly tremendous. And when I got closer, I could see that several water jets were already going up into the buildings, but the fire just looked too strong to be put out. It didn't look as if the water jets had any effect at all on the blaze. And, I think people were just shocked. They were shocked, speechless, because towers don't just burn, much less entire estates. And Hong Kong is not a quiet place, but that night it was.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, when we talk about fires, usually we hear it's one unit or at worst, maybe one floor. This was very different. It gutted almost entirely one housing estate. We're talking about 7 out of 8 blocks at Wang Fuk Court. Why was this one different?
It's different because the complex was undergoing renovation when the fire started. So naturally, investigators, when they were looking into the fire, they started there. Now, all 8 buildings, just before the fire, they were wrapped up in green scaffolding nets. So they stood out in the Tai Po skyline. And these are protective nets, which, when you think about it right now, it's ironic because they were later found to be made of substandard materials that eventually allowed the fire to spread really quickly from building to building. And we found out that contractors had also plastered foam boards over the windows, which then allowed, and these foam boards were flammable, and these allowed the fire to shatter the windows and then enter the buildings very quickly. And that's why, even inside the building, it was completely engulfed in flames. And the troubling thing is that residents had actually raised these concerns as early as 2024. To add to that, they also saw workers smoking on site. They've raised these complaints to the contractor, to various government departments, but they did some investigation. There was no safety violations found, and so everything just went unresolved.
At this point, I want to talk about what's been called the invisible victims, right? 10 migrant workers, domestic workers, died in the fire. One particular story was an Indonesian domestic worker, Sri Wahyuni. She died and she was found hugging and protecting her 93-year-old employer. Did you speak to some of the survivors?
Absolutely. I spoke to Miss Vame Verador. She's a helper from the Philippines, and she actually escaped Wang Tai House when the fire broke out. We had to pause the interview a couple of times because she was just so overcome with emotion. And Miss Verador was recounting the situation. She said at about 3 p.m., she got a call from the neighbor saying that there was a fire. And so she was at home with her employer's 2-year-old son and his grandmother at that point. She quickly picked up the boy and dragged the grandmother down the stairs. So they had to run down 17 floors at Wang Tai House. And the grandmother, the entire time, she was old, she was trailing behind. And so Miss Verador had to constantly turn around just to make sure that, she kept her in her sights. And they barely made it out alive. Let's hear from Miss Verador herself.
Kahit anong mangyari, hindi ko sila iiwan. Gusto kong magpahinga pero...
No matter what, I would not leave them. I wanted to rest, but I couldn't, because we might get trapped and the fire would reach us. When I reached the exit, I saw the building was already gone. Everything was burned. As for our building, the nets and bamboo were falling. It was raining with flaming debris.
Yung bamboo, tapos umuulan na siya ng mga bato na may kasamang apoy.
And that wasn't the end of Miss Verador's near-death ordeal, was it, Deb?
No, it wasn't. Turns out it was just a start because less than 2 weeks after the fire, Ms. Verador was still recovering when her employer told her to get dressed and head out. She didn't know where she was going. She thought that they were going to bring her for a medical checkup because at that point she was still experiencing quite severe body aches. But they brought her to an employment agency instead. The entire time her employers remained silent, and at the agency she was told that she was being terminated, and so she had to even sign on the employment contract that she had agreed to the termination due to the family's financial difficulties. And the whole time she said she had no warning, she had no say in the matter. And when we interviewed her at Bethune House, we realized that there were actually many other foreign domestic workers in a similar situation.
Yeah, that's really heartbreaking, isn't it? When you are, recovering from near death, you're suffering from your own trauma, and then you're told that, hey, you just lost your job as well. That is just spine chilling. That story. Now, the Hong Kong government launched an independent committee to investigate the matter. The public hearings began in March. This is what Hong Kong's Chief Executive John Lee said. Let's have a listen.
This fire reflects gross negligence in different parts of the maintenance works. Mistakes were made at different junctures, and we need systemic reform.
Now, the inquiry so far has unearthed some very troubling findings. There was a safety inspection just a week before the fire. Let's talk about who was in charge then. What was in that report that, had apparently passed safety standards, and how and why did it go so horribly wrong?
So before I get to the report, I just want to set some context here. We heard about the report during the public hearing, and the Hong Kong government actually ordered a judge-led independent committee to investigate the fire. They have 9 months to go through all these investigations, listen to witness testimonies, and then submit a report to Hong Kong leader John Lee. And on the first day of the hearing, the committee's lead counsel opened with quite a chilling statement. I quote, "We can say with confidence that during the day of the fire, almost all life-protecting fire safety devices failed due to human error." And so the entire course of the public hearings, we were listening and trying to understand what were these human failures. And we found out that this was also because the fire alarms were turned off, the fire tanks, the water tanks were empty, residents were unable to escape in time, or even extinguish the fires themselves. And it turned out that the contractors were already aware of these issues. So the inspection that Jan, you raised earlier, this was conducted by Victory Fire Engineering. They were hired by the contractors to conduct safety inspections. And the latest one was November 19, a week before the incident. Inspector actually found that the main power switches for the fire alarms, the water pumps at all 8 blocks were turned off. The fire services department must be notified of such shutdowns according to the inspector, he went to talk to the estate management. He asked them, hey, what's going on? And estate management office then told him that authorities have already been informed that the switches were turned off due to renovation work. But the entire time, the inspector was not shown any copy of the shutdown notice that was given to the authorities. He later admitted at a public hearing that he didn't follow up on the matter. In fact, during the hearing, we also did see CCTV footage of residents trying and failing to activate the fire alarms. They tried to, turn on the water as well, but all these failed.
Wow, that's really unsettling. What else has surfaced so far?
I want to take this chance now to highlight the problem of the scaffolding nets. The scaffolding nets we talked about earlier was problematic. The contractor knew it. But during the hearing, more and more evidence came out. We heard an audio recording of a WhatsApp voice message from the net supplier saying, I quote, "Call me immediately. Wang Fuk Court caught fire. You need to come up with a story because the netting we sent was non-fire retardant." At this point, when the recording was played, a lot of the residents, they were just shaking their heads. They were just looking at each other in disbelief because it confirmed their suspicions from the get-go. They've really started complaining about all these things since 2024. Now, what happened was after Hong Kong experienced a bunch of typhoons, the typhoons damaged some of the protective nets. And then so the contractor had engaged the supplier to replace some of these nets. And what happened was the contractor replaced them with cheaper substandard ones and concealed them in places that were quite hard to reach. They were so concealed that initial checks after the fire didn't find anything wrong. It was only when firefighters started accessing harder to reach places and they obtained samples from them that they realized that they were deliberately mixed in to avoid detection. And to top it off, the safety certificates proving that the nets were compliant were all fake. In practice, back then, before the bunch of regulatory changes that we see now, contractors only needed to provide the buildings department a safety certificate. And we heard that during the public hearing, the buildings department, they didn't conduct their own safety inspections, they didn't do any on-site checks, and that's why all these were allowed to pass. And so residents who attended the hearing, they listened to all this and they came out understandably quite upset. Let's have a listen.
We might have had our own assumptions, but what he's revealed shocked us. It turns out a lot of things were fake. There's also a series of cover-ups. If this continues, will there be even more things we don't know? The truth we are asking for?
And after hearing it, I felt distraught. Why would someone be so inhumane as to disregard all safety for money?
Deborah, from all that you've said so far, all roads seem to point back to the contractor, right? The one who's doing the renovation. As I understand it, Prestige Construction. Let's just talk a little bit more about Prestige Construction. From what I understand, they already have a bad reputation. There were more than 50 bids for Wang Fuk Court's renovation works, but Prestige's bid was the highest. And despite that, it won the contract. Now, we know it doesn't have to be the cheapest bid that, wins the contract, but that was the highest. It's highly unusual. How did that happen?
So the investigations are still going on. We don't have the full picture right now, but what I can tell you is that police have arrested 39 people. The ICAC, Hong Kong's anti-graft agency, have arrested 23 people. Now, all these arrests are linked to various stages, right? Corruption, bid rigging, and separately from witness testimonies from the public hearing, it seems that proxy votes were a huge problem during the tender process. Now, casting a proxy vote essentially means authorizing someone to vote on your behalf. And for Wang Fuk Court's Owners Corporation, that's the body that picked Prestige Construction to do the renovation project back in 2024. They had to go through a vote to select Prestige Construction. But residents during the public hearing, they all came out to testify and they recounted very unusual circumstances leading to Prestige winning the bid. They said that there were 570 votes cast during that meeting, but there were only 293 people in attendance. So what happened to the rest? We don't know. They were probably proxy votes. And when we zoom in on this particular element here, some residents also started pointing fingers at Taipo District Councillor Peggy Wong. Peggy Wong at that point was advising the owners corporation back then, and the residents claimed that she had incentivized them into allowing her to collect proxy votes. Now, Ms. Wong has since denied all accusations of corruption in a written statement, but she herself didn't attend a public hearing in person.
And going back to the survivors, what has been the hardest part for them?
A lot of the survivors, they cannot understand why the complaints that they raised as early as 2024 about the fire safety hazards, about corruption, and they filed all these complaints to various government bodies. They all went unresolved. Since then, over 1,000 people have petitioned to rebuild Wang Fuk Court, but again, that's not going to be an option. So all of them that right now, they have to agree to a resettlement plan by the government. They either have to agree to receive a cash payout or do a flat exchange. Now, the problem is each household has different needs. Some of them are senior citizens, right? They have regular doctors that they go to for checkups in Taipo. Some of them have young children who attend school in Taipo. So they don't want to leave the area. But the flats that they are given are scattered all across Hong Kong. So they have to make a decision by the end of August. And a lot of them also say that they have to top up at least $1 million Hong Kong dollars to get a similar sized apartment. So it's a financial problem as well. And then we talk about the insurance payout. Wang Fuk Court itself is covered by a 260 million USD insurance plan. But the claims is going to be a complex process because the insurance firm has not even been able to access the site. Right now, it's still cordoned off for investigations. So the government now plans to acquire the property titles as part of the resettlement scheme, and eventually they will be the beneficiary of the fire insurance. And so any future claims has to be negotiated between the government and the insurer, which means residents will have to wait for a very long time before they can get any form of insurance payout.
You've spoken to families, the survivors. You sat through the hearings. What's one story or one moment that has stayed with you the most?
What I've come to realize is that it's not just a house that they lost, but a home and a community. Now, the estate is home to many seniors. Over a third are above the age of 65. And when you talk to these old people, they don't even have the contact numbers of their neighbors. They simply just show up like clockwork at nearby tangs or even downstairs at the playground, for tea every day. They don't even know at this point whether the neighbor is dead or alive. They have no number to call. And that's the hardest part for seniors because they've always thought of living out their last years at this estate. They don't have the answers that they need to move on. And when I talk to the young people who are also part of the family, they grew up in the estate. They're surrounded by such strong community bonds. Now they're scattered everywhere. They completely feel displaced. One of the residents I spoke to, his name is Deborah Wong. He just celebrated his 21st birthday 2 days before the fire. Now, he was born and raised at Wang Fuk Court, and he told me that just before he left home for school, he took a selfie with his Indonesian domestic helper. And it turns out she passed away in the fire. And that was the last photo he had of her, and also the last photo he had of his house. Let's hear more from Luza.
When I was little and went downstairs to play, it was always the grandmas and uncles who helped me up when I fell. Now, I don't even know if they are alive or gone. To put it bluntly, even if they have passed away, I still hope they can tell me they are happy.
Wow, that must have been so difficult for you and your crew to hear what he had to say, wasn't it, Deborah?
It was quite emotional because we've been there since day one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had to also pause the interview a few times because
I can imagine. I mean, just listening to that soundbite, it's like, wow, good job. So beyond Hong Kong, this case is also being watched by other major cities with aging high-rise estates, and that's not uncommon. Why do you think this case has drawn interest, from other places beyond Hong Kong?
We look at mainland China, for instance. Just days after the fire, they announced a sweeping inspection of fire safety standards in high-rise buildings. And this is because there's a very deep integration between Hong Kong and China, which means that they likely tap on similar suppliers. So Chinese authorities said they will be inspecting 4 key areas, including scrutinizing the use of flammable materials, checking fire safety, equipment, and also emergency evacuation routes. And then we look at Singapore because there's a lot of similarities in the urban landscape. The Singapore government in January in Parliament, they announced that they will be reviewing regulations for the construction and maintenance of residential buildings. And they also talked about firefighting capabilities for high-rise buildings and also, potentially increasing the installation of home fire alarm devices in seniors' homes.
Right. So on that note, Deborah, thank you for that special report of the tragedy. As you continue to follow the independent committee's investigations, good job, you and your team.
Thank you, Jen.
The findings are expected by September and will be presented to Hong Kong's chief executive to determine what's next. It's months on since the tragedy. Many questions remain, and unsettling discoveries continue to unravel. For many families, closure is still out of reach and may only come if this investigation delivers the truth and accountability. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the CNA Correspondent podcast. It's brought to you by Tiffany Ang, Nat Vetivero, Craig Dale, Zikri Ayman, and me, Genevieve Woo. Bye for now.